And let's continue now with that breaking news. We're now joined by SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, as well as SABC News international editor Sophie Mokoena for more on this breaking news. Sherwin, let's start off with you. I mean, should we at all be surprised by the latest move by Marco Rubio?
I think it's always surprising in Bali when an ambassador of the stature of Ebrahim Rasool that represents a country like South Africa in a strategic ally that is the United States is out of the blue expelled by the U.S. Secretary of State via a social media sphere, right? I mean, they have not engaged with this ambassador. They haven't engaged with South Africa at the highest levels, despite the efforts that have been led by President Ramaphosa to, recalibrate this relationship, have direct discussions that are the norm within a strategic relationship. But does it come as a huge surprise that this relationship has continued to deteriorate since that very first social media post by Donald Trump, the misinformed post that cast aspersions on South Africa's land expropriation law, cast aspersions on possible white, quote-unquote, genocide in South Africa, and the calibrated response that we would not be bullied, quote-unquote, from President Ramaphosa when he spoke in Parliament in this regard, and the efforts that have gone on behind the scenes seems to really establish contacts, be that through direct engagement with members of Congress, be that with direct engagement with members of civil society in the United States. But I think it has been, we interviewed Rasool soon after his appointment in January, and he told me this is one of the toughest assignments that he's taken on behalf of South Africa, and it has come full circle now with his essentially his expulsion from the United States by the Secretary of State. And so the pressure is now ramped up. I think it's fair to say that the relationship in Bali between South Africa, between Pretoria and Washington, has now reached an all-time low, and it's difficult to see how one rescues the situation now moving forward. The South Africans are going to now recalibrate, talk behind closed doors. I've tried to call Ambassador Rasool. He's not picking up his phone right now. I've reached out to the spokesperson at the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. Kristen Piri has not responded yet, so I think they too are now digesting this news, and where we go from there will be very, very interesting to watch. The South Africans will have to respond in some way. What they say will be very instructive of how this relationship plays out moving forward.
And Sherwin, do we know exactly what really led here to the tensions we are seeing, particularly with the ambassador?
Well, there has been a concerted conservative media effort against South Africa, be that interviews that have been conducted with people linked to in their past with maybe AfriForum and Solidarity. There's been a big mobilization in terms of those groups here in the United States in terms of getting their positions across, and have been given a platform in social media circles. I think about the conversation between Tucker Carlson and a former gentleman linked to AfriForum, right? Ernst Roops, a lengthy discussion with him on a platform that gets millions of views in terms of conservative reach in the United States. And you've seen a number of iterations of that. For example, the article that Marco Rubio links to on his social media post, where he essentially says Rasool is persona non grata, he links that post to an article from the Breitbart news agency. And you'll recall, Mbali, that Breitbart's editor-at-large is a gentleman known as Joe Pollack. Joe Pollack has been seen in the last number of months as one of the top contenders. In fact, it seems that he's been campaigning to be Donald Trump's ambassador to South Africa, but he has taken a very aggressive, negative view, particularly through Breitbart and the coverage that they provide, in framing what is going on in South Africa, the human rights abuses that, quote-unquote, that President Donald Trump referred to in his executive order against South Africa. And this Breitbart article, refers to Rasool giving a talk at a foreign policy seminar earlier today, I think, where he said that Donald Trump is, according to this article, is leading a white supremacist movement in the United States. The article quotes Rasool purportedly saying that what Donald Trump is launching is an assault on incumbency, those who are in power, by mobilizing a supremacism against the incumbency at home, and I think I've illustrated abroad as well. So in terms of that, the supremacist assault on incumbency we see is in the domestic politics of the United States, the MAGA movement, the Make America Great Again movement, as a response not simply to a supremacist instinct, but to a very clear data that shows great demographic shifts in the United States, in which the voting electorate in the U.S. is projected to become 48% white. So, there is a move here where white Americans will in the future become a minority. Rasool, of course, went on to say other things. So this article seems to have been linked to the response we are now seeing on social media by Marco Rubio expelling our ambassador.
Let's bring in our editor there, Sophie Mokoena. Sophie, do we know exactly if this decision was communicated with Pretoria? What is Pretoria saying about this?
As Sherwin has kind of painted that picture, this was on social media. I think as we speak now, the officials are now discussing this matter. I think their messages back and forth to try to make sense of what transpired. But also, I think the ambassador-designate, Ebrahim Rasool, has also communicated with his principals in South Africa in terms of what has transpired. But I think Sherwin is correct. This tension has been escalating. You'd recall that on Saturday I spoke to the South African former president, Thabo Mbeki, who indicated that something must be done because this thing is getting out of hand. Him even making an example that the starting point should be to accept that Donald Trump was elected by a majority of the Americans, and he got into office through elections, and the endorsement he got, as you know, that the Republicans are now in control of the Senate and the House of Representatives. That speaks to, you can't ignore what he does or whatever he is saying, including those around him. And therefore, the best thing is to try and ensure that you are able to engage directly with perhaps some officials, for example, a person like the Secretary of State who is responsible for international affairs. But when Mbeki was speaking, you could see that he was able to sense a very tense relationship that is also escalating in terms of that tension. On the other hand, I've been talking to officials in the Department of International Relations. They pointed out that it is not good at all, but they are trying to come up with something when they go and negotiate with the Americans at the bilateral level, almost having accepted that South Africa is likely going to be excluded from AGOA. But then you will have to interact with America at bilateral level in terms of trade and investment. But they don't just want to go there to America to explain themselves and their policies, but to say, on these issues, this is what we are saying, we can entertain this, but we can't entertain this. In other words, they don't go there with the intention to go and account, but rather to say, how do we engage on these issues that you have concerns on? And Mbeki also saying that he was going to meet the Afrikaner community, these groups, AfriForum and Solidarity and other Afrikaners, to say, but our problems as a country cannot be resolved by going to America. You're just going to cause more problems for the country. So you must have engagement in the country and outside the country. But here we are now, and I think we all know when you are declared a persona non grata, you take the first flight out of that country. I'm sure as we speak, he is preparing, if he has received a formal communication where they are declaring him a persona non grata, he has to leave the country immediately. But we don't know, maybe it was a post before the proper communication was sent to him.
And Sophie, before I go to Sherwin again, just to get another insight from you in terms of where we are right now, would remember that President Cyril Ramaphosa said that South Africa will not be bullied, making reference to US President Donald Trump. But at the same time, what is the likelihood of Pretoria also retaliating?
there is no way Pretoria can retaliate at the moment because there's no ambassador of America in South Africa. You would recall that the ambassador who was there appointed by the former president of the United States of America, Joe Biden, left much earlier, just towards his contract expiry date. He left. Also, the most senior person who is there, who was acting, she also announced that she is going to end her contract much earlier. She was supposed to leave in August, but she's leaving much earlier. And therefore, when you retaliate, how do you retaliate? Because normally when you retaliate, you would summon the ambassador of that country in your country or send that ambassador back to that country. But there is no senior diplomat, as we speak, here in South Africa representing the United States of America. As Sherwin has pointed, that the person who has been very hard mobilizing and lobbying that America take action against South Africa because of those allegations, he is the person whom many people are saying he's likely going to be the ambassador of the U.S. in South Africa, and therefore we don't know. So America doesn't have a senior diplomat here in the country, in Pretoria.
Yeah, and Sherwin, let's go back to you. Now that we've seen the expulsion of Ebrahim Rasool, how long can it take for South Africa to then replace, Rasool with another ambassador in the U.S.? What is the process followed?
Well, that will come from the discretion of the presidency. It is the presidency's purview to appoint an ambassador. But as we are saying, this is breaking news. The South Africans, the ambassador here in Washington, South African bureaucrats and politicians in Pretoria or around the country are digesting this news. I think they will have to think about how they respond here. They will have to think very closely on who will be a replacement that would be more perhaps acceptable to the United States, but don't underestimate how severe this response is and what a body blow this will be to South Africa, to South Africa's image abroad. I think South Africa is very proud of how it conducts its foreign policy on the international stage, and this will be quite an insult, to have an ambassador of the stature of Ebrahim Rasool booted out of the country in this way. I don't think, it'll leave a bitter taste in many South Africans' mouths, the political stratosphere writ large. And recall when Ambassador Ruben Bridget in South Africa gave that very controversial press conference, pointing fingers at South Africa's possible involvement in arms transfers with the Russian Federation, the sanction ship, the U.S. sanctioned ship, the Lady Arda, docked in Simonstown. And remember, he was demarched by Naledi Pandor, May of 2023, called in to explain himself, but he wasn't booted out of the country once that judicial inquiry completed its investigations that didn't find that South Africa had in fact transferred the weapons as was accused, or certainly as was the allegation from the United States. Because this is such an important relationship, because it's such a strategic relationship, we might not be happy with each other, but we'll still talk to you. The United States going one step further here than the South Africans did in relation to Bridget, not expelling Bridget, they've now expelled Rasool, so this will be a real body blow to South Africa, and how they respond is going to be very, very interesting to watch indeed.
Sophie, when it comes to sending an envoy to the U.S., I mean, we keep on hearing, we saw in the Sunday Times over the weekend, that really there is no move yet by government to send an envoy. Also, President Cyril Ramaphosa saying that, they will most likely not send one yet. What is the situation thereof? Because it's quite clear that it's quite important for talks to take place between Washington and as well as Pretoria.
I was told that government was advised that when they sent this delegation or a team to the United States of America, they can't go there to explain themselves, like they are going to account like students who have done something wrong, and therefore they have to explain to the vice chancellor or at school to the headmaster. But they must go there with negotiating skills in terms of even having issues that they are putting on the table that can be a compromise in terms of the concerns of the United States of America. Now, to do that, you have to think thoroughly. Somebody was even saying to me, there was that campaign to name a street in Sandton using the name of a Palestinian activist. And that street, that's where you have the U.S. consulate. And therefore, people saying, rather drop that attempt to do that because the Americans are going to take offense. And small things that you can say, we can leave this one, we can continue with this one. And therefore, to do that, it demands a proper, thorough discussion in terms of what can be the give and take. You can't just go there and explain yourself like a child in front of your parents. And therefore, that will be very, very difficult. But secondly, South Africa publicly saying that when you look at President Trump, he's still building capacity in terms of state. In other words, you would want to engage more people in the cabinet, and therefore some of the posts are still vacant. But I think that reason for me doesn't stand that much, because what is critical is to engage the Foreign Affairs Department of Marco Rubio, because he is the one who's dealing with the relations around the world, and he's there. But I think at this moment, South Africa will have to now go back and think in terms of where to from here, because this is a massive step. This is not something that you can take light. And as I pointed out, there's no ambassador of the U.S. here in South Africa where you can even call him in to come, or her in to come and explain, so that you show the world that you can't be bullied. But I think I agree with Sherwin that this is a massive story. I have no doubt that South Africa will release a statement tonight or tomorrow morning in terms of what has transpired, because clearly this is going to be a big story tomorrow morning.
Certainly, Sophie, it is a major story coming out this evening. And perhaps, Sherwin, I mean, whenever we speak about, the tensions between South Africa and the US, the issue around AGOA always comes to the fore. Can we now expect more developments then to come out from Washington when it comes to AGOA and trade between the two countries?
I mean, if South Africa was, driving a car on a highway, you would see a big billboard that said, South Africa, find new friends, you're out of AGOA. I think that has been a very clear sentiment. I think the South Africans have certainly received the message that they are very likely, more likely than not, to be excluded from any renewal of AGOA. But AGOA itself in Bali is on the chopping block here. Donald Trump is relooking at trade relationships, particularly free trade agreements, be that between Mexico, Canada, and the United States, be that with the EU. And AGOA, although South Africa has been very much the focus here in terms of African relations as it pertains to AGOA, I think it's fair to say that AGOA itself has a lot of question marks about where it goes. It's up for renewal purportedly in September this year, but nothing is certain given the way this president has conducted his foreign policy via megaphone on social media. And let us not underestimate the level of disrespect that the South Africans have had to bear here in terms of how the U.S. officials, be that the President, the Secretary of State, have communicated, right? They haven't picked up the phone to say we have concerns. They haven't said, I'm so sorry, I won't be able to come to the G20 foreign ministers meeting. They just tweeted. They have posted on social media. And that is not how you conduct diplomacy anywhere in the world. And I think, if you're Canadian, if you're Panamanian, if you're European, if you're South African, if you're Chinese, you are feeling, a sense of retribution from this, this administration. And it is a recalibration as to how, when protocols go out of the window, how do you then recalibrate to communicate in this new era where, you know, the highest level of the United States government is tweeting and posting on social media instructions about, you know, the relationship of a strategic ally. This is a level of disrespect that the South Africans have had to digest here and recalibrate here, and perhaps not go too far in terms of being too dramatic in their response. But as the President has said, and as we have quoted in the discussion, you know, South Africa has been very clear that they will not be bullied. The question is, how does South Africa back that up in terms of how they react now?
All right. And Sophie, I mean, let's wrap up this discussion. When it comes to the G20, what does it mean for South Africa with this tension taking place, and for the G20 presidency to be taking place in South Africa under this cloud with the US?
Well, I think it's clear that US is not going to send the senior delegation. We saw what happened during the meeting of foreign affairs ministers. The Secretary of State didn't come, and also the Secretary of Treasury, who was expected in Cape Town, pulling out, even though he cited the reason as being that there was going to be a first cabinet meeting of President Trump. So I can't see any miracle happening in these 6 or 7 months to mend the relations to an extent that President Trump can review his position and come to South Africa. But President Ramaphosa is still hopeful that the situation can change, and he is still looking forward to host his U.S. counterpart, even saying that because President Trump is a golfer, he intends to take him to one of the golf courses here in South Africa to play. So we don't know. That's the problem. But the good thing with G20, America is one country out of those countries, and we've seen the European Union leadership yesterday making a commitment that they support South Africa's presidency of the G20, even saying they agree and support South Africa's theme and the focus. On the other hand, yesterday, President Vladimir Putin, who is having a better relationship with Donald Trump as we speak right now, yesterday when he was talking about the ceasefire proposal from the United States of America, thanking President Trump in terms of pushing for a peace solution between Ukraine and Russia. He also mentioned other BRICS countries and saying that these countries have been with us, supporting us in relation to peace process. He did also mention South Africa. And that there was perception that because President Ramaphosa invited Zelensky to come to South Africa, Russia will take offense. In other words, I'm trying to say those countries that he mentioned in the BRICS family are your major countries who are also in the G20. So you can see the glue that holds together the South and South Africa being part of that group will rally behind South Africa in relation to the coming G20. Yes, America might not be there. America is one country out of those 20 countries, almost 22, including 21, including the AU that has just joined, AU and EU being the groups.
All right, Sophie, thank you so much for your time. That's SABC News international editor Sophie Mokoena, as well as SABC News US correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, just giving us an update there when it comes to that breaking news in which we saw coming in this evening from US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, saying there that the US has expelled the South African ambassador to the US, Ebrahim Rasool.